Hi class, good day. Now we are on our last set of modules for this semester. I hope that the last set were giving you not only a glimpse of Rizal's life, but also you were able to appreciate some of the pertinent lessons that his life has to offer, especially for the young generations. So, for this last set of modules, we will be talking now on the writings of Rizal. Because again, the descriptive title of this course, GE 1213, is Life and Writings of Rizal. So after we are able to give to you his life, his childhood memories, the kind of life he lived, what are those things that contributed to the becoming of a hero, especially on the experiences of the life of Rizal. At this juncture, we would like to point out that the kind or the becoming of a hero is not just because of the life and the experience that Rizal had lived, but also there are a lot of writings and masterpieces in the life of Rizal that are worthy to be appreciated, worthy to be emulated, and worthy to be understood by students like you, for you to be able to understand that the kind of hero that Rizal as being presented in the history books today would not be made possible without the knowledge that he imparted to the Filipinos during his time and the youth like you listening to this discussion today. So let us proceed for this module 7. We will be talking about Rizal's Filipino nation, and on this discussion we will be talking about some of his writings and how he was able to predict with amazing accuracy the history of the Filipinos before, during, and after the reign of the Spaniards. So for the specific learning outcomes, we will be talking about the structure of Philippine history from the lens of Rizal. We will try to look into how Rizal was able to perceive the history of the Filipino nation and our civilization even before the coming of the Spaniards. Second, we are also going to assess Rizal's view of the future and his concept of a Filipino nation. So, after trying to tell us what kind of history should we have even before the coming of the Spaniards, Rizal will also tell us with amazing accuracy the future of the Philippines basing on the past that he was able to witness, and name areas of integration for the strengthening of faith and reason in relation to nation building. And of course, all of this will not be possible if you are not going to integrate our past to the present that Rizal was able to foresee in the 19th century, and integrating it to the kind of Filipino nation that he would envision the Philippines would have. So, on this module, we will be talking about 3 specific writings. So, we will be talking about Morga's Successus de las Islas Filipinas, wherein Rizal was able to annotate. Second, we will also be talking about his writing on the indolence of the Filipino youth. Is it true that the Filipinos are by nature lazy according to the Spaniards? That is why we were not able to improve ourselves. That is why the poor became poorer and the rich become richer because of the mentality of being lazy by the Filipinos. And third, we will also be talking about the Philippines a century hence, or the Philippines within a century, wherein Rizal was able to predict the future of the Philippines if the Spaniards will still continue to apply very oppressive and unjust policies in the Philippines. And after discussing these 3 different writings, we will also be integrating this lesson to the study of Rizal. Okay, let us first talk with, or we will first be discussing on the first article of Morga's Successus de las Islas Filipinas and emphasizing on Rizal's annotation. So class, on this first writing, I would like to emphasize that this is not a work of hands by Rizal, no? Hindi niya sinulat ang Morga's Successus de las Islas Filipinas. However, he made his own annotation. So when we say annotation, he made his own critique, he made his own view on the writings of Antonio Morga. So ano bang sinasabi ni Morga on Sucesos de las Islas Filipinas that gave Rizal that understanding that at some point there are issues on the writing that are worthy to be corrected and to be annotated. So Morga, it is one of the important works on the early history of the Spanish colonization of the Philippines, published in Mexico in 1609 by Antonio de Morga, annotated by Jose Rizal, with a prologue by Dr. Ferdinand Blumentritt. So, in this article, no, because noon class there's no presence of MS Word or anything that you can that technology would offer. So it's very rare for Rizal, no, very outstanding to hear that Rizal copied, no, the entire book of Morga, and he was able to annotate, put his critique on the lower version of that book. So kinopya niya lahat. And if there are some pages where he wants to put his annotations or critique or some of the things that he wanted to negate on the writing of Antonio, sinusulat niya sa baba. So, the book Sucesos de las Islas Filipinas narrates the history of wars, intrigues, diplomacy, and evangelization of the Philippines in somewhat disjointed way of modern historians have noted that Morga has a definite bias, no, and would often distort facts or even rely on the invention to fit his defense of the Spanish conquest. So, you might ask, Ma'am, in this book of Antonio Morga, what is it so specific about it that Rizal was really so against, no, in this writing? Now, I'd like to make a summary or the basic contention of Rizal in that book is that Morga was trying to tell us that the Filipinos were just civilized because of the coming of the Spaniards. In short, sinasabi ni Antonio de Morga na yes, naging civilized lang ang mga Filipinos because the Spaniards came to the Philippines, and if not because of the coming of the Spaniards, then the Philippines would have become an uncivilized state. And that he pointed out that we are Indios, no, we don't have our own government, we don't have our own civilization such as our own government, social, economic way of life, and we can all attribute and we gave thanks to the Spaniards for giving us this kind of civilization. So Morga's purpose for writing the Sucesos was to point out lacking issue with the scopes of this claim. So sabi ni Rizal, may mga points on this book that are not compatible with how we view our own history as Filipino people. And that the conversion and conquest were not as widespread as portrayed because the missionaries were only successful in conquering a portion of the population of the certain islands. And that sabi ni Rizal, yes, they might say that on some parts of the Filipinos where the Spaniards had pacified, perhaps they were able not to see that civilization was not really seen in these people. But sabi ni Rizal, there are already Filipinos in some parts or in some unpacified, no, portions of the Philippines that have their own civilizations, that have their own barangay, no? If we go back to our discussion on the barangay, you can attest that even before the coming of the Spaniards, there's already a presence of the barangay headed by a datu, followed by a maharlika, aliping sa gigili, timawa, or aliping na mamahay. In short, the coming of the Spaniards is not only, no, is not a proof of our civilization, but in short, our own barangay, our own government, the trade that we had, the kind of economic trade we had with the Filipinos within, no, the Philippines, and some other international trade are worthy to be emphasized, that hindi lamang ang mga Spaniards ang nagbibigay ng sibilisasyon sa mga Pilipinos, but our own ancestors could prove that this is already existing even before the coming of the Spaniards in the pre-colonial Philippines. So, Rizal's three main propositions can be, no, summed up in three. and that the people of the Philippines had a culture of their own before the coming of the Spaniards. We believe on the diwata, we believe on animism, and our belief on it can also be a testament of our legends and folklore. So napakaraming evidences that would prove that we already have our own culture even before the coming of the Spaniards, and it can be best explained in the barangay, the 16th century Philippines. And that Filipinos were decimated, demoralized, exploited, and ruined by the Spanish colonization. And that Rizal was trying to point out that if not because of the coming of the Spaniards, the Philippines could have its own culture and civilization that is so distinct, and we can also appreciate it by looking into our common past. And that the present state of the Philippines was not necessarily superior to its past. That hindi natin masasabi na the Spanish civilization introduced by the Spaniard is superior in our past. But our own barangay is a proof that we have our own civilization that could have grown, that could have bloomed into a civilization if not interrupted by the Spaniards. So, sabi ni Rizal, like almost all of you, I was born and brought up in ignorance of our country's past. So, Rizal was trying to point out that learning and studying our common history as Filipino people would give us a glimpse that hindi lamang ang pagdating ng mga Spaniards ang nagbigay sa atin ng civilization, ang nagbigay sa atin ng kind of political, economic, and social heritage, but our common history as a Filipino people, especially on how our forefathers was able to instill our political, social, and economic activities are evidences of our own past as Filipino people, and these are all not entirely because of the Spaniards. So that is what Morga Successus de las Islas Filipinas was all about, and that again, we all have our own civilization even before the coming of the Spaniards. So let us proceed with the second article that Rizal was able to write during his time, and that is entitled The Indolence of the Filipinos, sobre la indolencia de los Filipinos. And that on this article, Rizal was trying to defend that the Filipinos are not by nature lazy, and that we are not by nature as how the Spaniards would describe us as tamad. In one of this article, Rizal was trying to point out that when the Spaniards told us na kaya daw we are not improving kasi Filipinos would just go to their farmland as early as 5 a.m. but has to go home early, and that is an indicator of being lazy because we don't spend much of the time to till our farm the entire day compared to how most of the Spaniards was able to dedicate their lives to their work. Now, Rizal pointed out in this article that we are not because by nature lazy, but we are only not trying to adapt with our tropical climate, and that since we are in a tropical country, so napakainit ng Pilipinas, and that farmers has to go to their farmlands as early as 4 to 5 a.m. and has to go home early because we cannot kill ourselves by being exposed to the heat of the sun. And at sinasabi ni Rizal na kaya umuwi tayo ng maaga kasi napakainit, tutok na tutok ang araw that can destroy our health and our well-being. And that is it is not because we like to go home early because we are by nature lazy, but because we are adapting to our own climate in the Philippines. So that is just one of the example that Rizal tried to point out in this article. Rizal pointed out that long before the coming of the Spaniards, the Filipinos were industrious, and that we spend most of our time not tilling our land, working in our farmlands, and devoting our lives to our day-to-day living. But when the Spaniards came, they became gamblers, dependent, powerless, corrupt, amnesiacs, disloyal to our identity, and indolence, because there are a lot of changes, especially on how the Spaniards governed the Philippines, that totally disrupted our way of life in the Philippines. And that according to Rizal, all the causes of the indolence can be reduced to two factors, and that if we are by nature indolent, as to how the Spaniards are trying to describe us, because we have limited training and education, and that this limited education that the Filipinos receive contributed to the lack of opportunities that Filipinos have during the Spanish colonial era, and that Filipinos do not receive the same opportunities that are available to the foreigners or to the Spaniards living in the Philippines, and that they are thought to be inferior. So in short, Rizal was trying to point out that the lack of opportunities given to the Filipinos contributed to how they responded during the Spanish colonial era in the Philippines. And so ikaw ba naman, we are not even given equal opportunities with the Spaniards, and so the works of the Filipinos are only limited to farming, tilling the land, and we are not being given opportunities co-equal with the Spaniards. So kung binigyan lang tayo ng magandang opportunity, education, and training, then we could have used this as our tool to become good members of the society. And that the second factor is the lack of national sentiment of unity among them, because we were trained to be disunited, and that is why there is no mentality of a nation, and that there is no unity among the Filipinos to work hand in hand for the nation building, because we were oppressed in such a way that we were trained to be individualistic and do what is only able and what is only available during that time. So if only the Spaniards gave us good education, wide array of training, and that they were able to emphasize that national sentiment, and this could have contributed to the kind of Filipinos that is not indolent as to how the Spaniards were trying to portray us. And that Rizal was trying to point out in this article that to serve the country by telling the truth. How can the Spaniards govern the country if they are always maligning and trying to impose policies that are against Filipinos, and that we are discriminated, and how we inherited some of our negative traits from the Spaniards. Kasi nga, sabi ni Rizal in this article, so sino ba talaga ang mas tamad? Mas tamad ba ang Pilipino na umuuwi ng maaga kasi nga tutok na tutok ang araw? Or mas tamad ang mga Espanyol na nagpapaypay at nagpapaserbisyo sa mga Pilipinos because they wanted the Filipinos to serve them. So Rizal was trying to point out that mas tamad ang mga Espanyol because they wanted to be served rather than the Filipinos who just wanted to do it because of the limited experience, and to let us know how we could rise from oppression, and to show to us that we have been deceived by the Spaniards, and to remind us that we were and are and could be Filipinos who has a lot of opportunities that we can do only if these limited opportunities were not presented to us during that time. And so that is what the article is all about. Now, let us proceed to the last article Rizal had written, and that is the Philippines within the century. And that is an essay written by the Philippine national hero Rizal to forecast the future of the country within 100 years. And that he said that the causes of the misery suffered by the Filipino people can be attributed to the Spaniards, and how the Filipinos was trying to adopt themselves, kung anong klaseng indolence, kung anong klaseng Filipinos ang dinidescribe ng mga Spaniards, were of course a result of the biases and injustices of the Spaniards, and that the deterioration and disappearance of the Filipino indigenous culture, when we are talking here of the Rizal's exposition on his annotation, that if we were not civilized, it's because there are a lot of injustices committed, no, that stop our own way of interpreting and progressing into one Filipino nation. And that the passivity and submissiveness to the Spanish colonizers was because we were trained and we were called to adopt that way, and the realization of the oppression of the colonizers. So, what will become of the Philippines within a century? Will they continue to become a Spanish colony? So, after 100 years of Spanish colonization, ano na ang mangyayari sa Pilipinas if the Spaniards will continue to adopt bias and oppressive means in the Philippines? So, sabi ni Rizal, there might be two results, no? For those who have strong spirit over the liberty of the country, then independence was assured. If the Filipinos will think that oppression should be limited only because we have our own, no, our own destiny as a Filipino people, and by shaping our destiny, we will try to go against the Spaniards, then independence can be assured. But for those who are discouraged and disillusioned by sad experiences, shall be a prison of the colony forever. And if we will not go against and we will not use our rights, no, to uphold our rights, then we will continue to become a Spanish colony forever. And that, sabi ni Rizal, the possible outcomes, the Philippines will remain under the colonization but with more law and greater liberty because he believed in assimilation. They will declare themselves independent in being assimilated by the Spaniards. However, Rizal was also trying to tell us that if the Spaniards or the Spain will continue to oppress the Filipino people, then the Filipinos will go against them and independence is assured. So, a message to Spain, sabi ni Rizal, Spain, must we someday tell Filipinas that thou hast no ear for her woes, and that if she wishes to be saved, she must redeem herself. It's a message, I think, class, not only to Spain but to the Filipinos. Sabi ni Rizal, Spain, if you will not correct yourself, then the fear of revolution is at hand. However, if Spain will correct its ways of administering the Filipinos, then cooperation with the Filipinos and giving them liberty would also be assured, and the Filipino cooperation can also be assured. But again, Rizal predicted with amazing accuracy that the Spanish colony would end because of the oppressions and tyranny of the people, especially the Spaniards in the Philippines and Viola. It all came to reality after 333 history of colonization in the Philippines. So with all of this, class, with all of this understanding that we had on his annotation of Morga, that we already have our own civilization, that we are not by nature indolent, and that Spain would really lose Philippines if it will not apply democratic, no, policies on the country. What is now Rizal's legacy to the 21st century? This discussion will revolve around what are the things now that Rizal was able to do during his lifetime that can tell us that he was not just able to be deceived by the Spanish oppression, but he was able to make use of his life as a way that even during that time he had made several changes, no, especially in the Pitan, that are worthy to be emulated. So for progressive education, sabi ni Rizal that the progressive school movement deconstructed the take it for granted idea that the school is an enclave where the students learns first and then later, after graduation, gets a job and hopefully becomes a productive member of the community. Rizal said that against this notion, it advocated and practiced the principle that the school is an integral working promoting the well-being of the community. At sinasabi ni Rizal that the school is a partner, to help the students come up with the kind of youth that are contributory to the progress of the nation. And that he said that for it to be done, there must be things that a school should do in order to help its students become progressive members of the community. So, sabi ni Rizal, there must be also social entrepreneurship. If you go back to the discussion on Rizal in Dapitan, Rizal created a cooperative wherein he aimed to promote and improve the agricultural products in Dapitan, provide capital for the purchase of these goods, and help to the extent possible the harvesters and laborers by means of the store where articles of basic necessity are sold at moderate prices. So, in short, nagtanim si Rizal ng mga kahoy in Dapitan. He was able to make use of it for social entrepreneurship, sold it to the people in Dapitan, and by there, he was able to tell us that if only we can apply and teach the children how to do social entrepreneurship, then it can contribute to the economic activity of the nation. Community development, aside from creating his boys in Dapitan, planting different agricultural products in Dapitan, Rizal was able to develop the community, especially in Dapitan, by creating his yung patubig, the waterworks that Rizal was able to do there. He was able also to discover specific rare species that was even named after him. He was able to create these Dapitan boys, taught them several lessons that for him are very essential in coming up with a future generation of Filipinos. And even the late former Claro Imrecto, the greatest Filipino nationalist of our time, he said in a speech in 1960 to a civic convention in Baguio City, and identified Rizal as the poet, the thinker, realist, and Bonifacio the idealist and the man of action, and Mabini the statesman, as three of the greatest nationalists of this country that has produced. And the legacy, not only Rizal, Bonifacio, and Mabini was able to contribute to the Philippines, are our inspiration to do well, not only in school, but also in all aspects of our life as Filipinos. So what are now the relevance of all the things that we've discussed earlier? Class, I think it is vital to tell you that Rizal was only telling us one thing, and that the role of the students like you are so important that you have your own ways to apply it in your own local community. If Rizal was able to apply through his legacy to Dapitan some of the very important social, political, economic, educational lives that are contributing to the development in Dapitan, then aside from the writings, because if you look into the writings of Rizal, it is so vague, that youth like you might say na, Ma'am, napakalaki namang mga ginagawa ni Rizal. I cannot die to the Filipino nation. I cannot offer my life for this nation by dying just how Rizal did. But looking into his legacy, you can see that through his own little acts of social entrepreneurship, through his little acts of education to the Dapitan boys, he was able to prove to us that we can do it in our own little way, little by little, not necessarily grand, not necessarily going against the colonizers, not necessarily always going against the government. But Rizal is telling us that we have our own share to partake and to support, that by doing so, we can be productive members of the community. Again, class, let us not ask what our country can do for us, but what we can do for our country. In Rizal's writings today, in the discussion that we had today, Rizal was able to make use of his knowledge, make use of his ability to tell us that we are not by nature indolent. We are not civilized just because the Spaniards came here, and that Spain can lose its power by not coming up with policies that are vital to the Filipinos. And that we can do it in our own little own ways. If Rizal was able to develop Dapitan because of his knowledge and ideals of a Filipino nation, then the challenge now is you can also emulate with Rizal's deeds in history, that in your own little way of understanding and application, you have your role in this country. Not necessarily grand, not necessarily superior, but something that is worthy to change even your own local community in simple and little ways. So class, I hope that that sum up our discussion for Module 7. And I hope that you also learned about some of the writings of Rizal and how we can apply it in today's generation. Again, as I always say, remember that if you have question, you may post it in the inquiry and concern section of your online classroom homepage, or reserve it during our next synchronous class. Thank you so much for listening today, and thank you so much for all your patience in this pre-recorded discussion. Please know that again, stay safe, wear a mask, and always maintain social distancing whenever you go out in your own homes. Until our next module, I'll see you again. For this time, thank you so much, and I'll see you again on Module 8. Goodbye class, I'll see you again next time.